Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Justin Jeffrey and we are Save Our Rail. We are a broad coalition of citizens engaged to stop the sale of the Cincinnati Southern Railroad. We feel that this is a very important asset and there shouldn't be a rush to sell it. We're going to talk about the reasons why. So first, I wanted to start off with our first speaker, which is former Councilman Kevin Flynn. So here's the mic.
Thanks, Justin. Hello, everybody. Cincinnati Southern Railway has been a significant asset for the city of Cincinnati for almost 150. For that 150 years, we've had people trying to sell the railroad, saying, oh, it's not going to, rail's dead. Well, just last year, President Biden, who markets himself as the most pro-union president in the history of the country, stopped private negotiations between the railway companies and the unions and forced them to make a deal because rail was so important to the economics of this country that it would have cost the country $1 billion a day if freight railway was stopped. We can't afford to give up this asset. 43% of the total general capital in the 23 budget was from the proceeds from the rent we received in the Southern Ohio Railway lease. Now, I will give you, the lease is undervalued. The parties have come to an agreement. They say the railroad's worth $1.6 billion. I think that might be undervalued. You certainly couldn't replace it today for $1.6 billion. There aren't comparable sales, but if you want to take a local example of a sale that Norfolk Southern sold to the city of Cincinnati, take the unused spur that runs through Oakley and Hyde Park that became Wasson Way. Norfolk Southern has sold that at $4.3 million per mile. Put that over the 337 miles of the railroad. You've got a non-functioning railroad spur that they didn't need. They're selling for the same price that they want to buy the key component to their entire nation's railroad system. That's crazy. The good part about this is the city doesn't need to sell it to get that kind of money. The lease that sets the railway price is up. That's why all this started, is they were forced to negotiate starting in 2022. The lease is up in 2026. If you simply take the $1.6 billion that they want to sell it for, put what's known in real estate terms as a CapEx on a net lease of a reasonable return on investment of, say, 6%, that's low when you're talking treasury bills are trading at 4.25% right now. Take 6%, that would bring in $96 million a year to the city. And it would go up with inflation. As the current lease goes, it has a increasing factor. And we'd still own the railroad. We don't have to pay investment advisors. We don't have to pay the trading companies that control the stock market the 1 to 2% that would be necessary in order to properly manage a holding of $1.6 billion. 1 second, and I'll let you go. We can unlock this today by negotiating with the railroad for a lease rather than a sale. And I guarantee you, Norfolk Southern will come to the table once we vote down this stupid vote that they want us to have in November. But it's going to take everybody in the city getting together and realizing, yes, Cincinnati has tremendous capital needs, but no, we don't have to give away our asset in order to unlock the money needed to fix these things. 2 more things real quick, folks, I just want to emphasize is that, 1.6 billion invested properly, maybe I could live with that if I trusted that the 1.6 billion would be there. Who's going to control this 1.6 billion? It's a group of 5 trustees that nobody knows how or who they are or how they're, well, they know who they are. Most of them are former politicians. They're appointed by one person, the mayor. So when you hear in the advertisements, oh, this is going to be governed by an apolitical, non-political body, when you stop laughing, just shake your head and say no and tell people it's actually a hyper-political body. One person, one elected individual appoints these people for unlimited terms. We have one trustee that's been on the board since 1987. You're supposed to have staggered terms under state law for these trustees, except the city screwed that up, and now they're all appointed either this year or next year because nobody had kept up with the appointing a trustee every other year or 2 trustees every other year. The other thing is the language. They had years to work on this language. They had months to craft it. They could have specified the money will be first spent on the over $500 million of capital needs that have been identified in the city capital budget. If you take out the city capital budget, and it's available on the city's website, the beginning of the budget talks about the specific needs we have. And we have a lot of them. Whether it be in the Department of Transportation, where instead of the 100 miles a year we're supposed to be resurfacing, next year they've budgeted for us to do 4 miles. We're going to have a lot of potholes, folks. The Cincinnati Parks had an outside company come in and say, we've got $51 million of deferred maintenance that needs to be done right now, or health and safety, compliance with laws, or just destruction of the asset will occur. Recreation Department did the same thing, and I think theirs was over $100 million. The needs are significant. There's nothing in the law that says this is what they're going to be spent on. I'll give you two predictions. One is somebody's going to find some way, and it's not that hard, to spend the money on the next big project that they want to do, whether that's a new arena, whether that's capping over Fort Washington Way, whether that happens to whatever the project of the day happens to be. The city buys it, tears down what's there. It's now an existing city capital asset. They now have the opportunity to replace it. The other thing that's going to happen, and you can see this in the budget, you don't have to believe me. Look at the city's budget and look at what they've done over the years. The operating budget is what always people took time to look at. And that was always where the squeeze was. Nobody ever looked at the capital budget. So what department heads did, rather than laying off the people that couldn't be funded by the operating budget, they shifted the salaries over to the capital budget. In the city's capital budget now, we spend for parks, we give them $2 million a year generally in budgets, in the capital budget. Over $1 million of that dollars is spent on salaries. And the people with getting those salaries aren't building anything. We contract out all of the capital projects. And that's throughout the city budget. Whether it's the planning department, the transportation department, the recreation department, pick your department, the capital budget is being used for operating purposes. That's only going to get stronger. So when you hear the commercials that say, oh, this will be a way to save our police and fire departments without raising taxes, you've already heard the commercials, I'm sure. Don't believe them. That's one thing it can't be used for, is salaries for police and fire. So with that, I'm going to leave you with things. Please don't sell our rail. And to paraphrase an old Bob and Tom joke, no forking way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Our next guest is well known on the west side. His name is Pete Whitty, and if you've ever been to Price Hill Chili, you've probably seen him there. Pete?
I'm glad I'm known for hanging out at Price Hill Chili. Kevin is well versed in all the financial dynamics of these types of transactions. So I can't really follow up much on what he had to say. The one thing I will say, from a neighborhood perspective, one of the biggest concerns is, once again, any proceeds generated from this kind of deal will be spent here in the core or on big projects that all the big money people in this town would like to have done, all the while neighborhoods continue to struggle, seek investment, try to figure out ways to uncork development, and it never seems to get the real assistance needed from City Hall. And that's why I have no faith that these dollars would ever see the light of day outside of 45202. Having said that, I also am quite concerned with the company the city has decided to do this deal. I understand they're in the lease. The lease is coming to an end. But of all the companies to do a deal with, is the one that destroyed a little town in Ohio called East Palestine. Norfolk Southern has decimated a community, has yet to figure out how to actually make that community right. And this, unfortunately, is the company that we might give a great deal to and sell them our railroad. So I hope people factor in who the city is doing the deal with. And I really hope that people pay attention to this deal and do not let slick TV commercials convince you all the details of this. Please look at our website. It'll be up and running. And please get informed on this, because we do not want people to be misled that all of a sudden we have a windfall of money. Let's go fix everything. It just won't be that easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Right now I want to introduce Adam Kohler, who has started the SaveOurRail.org website, and to my left is Sean Baker, which will be our PAC treasurer, and Caitlin Brown, that will be our deputy treasurer. I'm going to turn it over to you, Adam.
All right, guys, for those who don't know me, I'm originally from Price Hill, and yes, Pete Whitney haunts that place, and he always will haunt that place. So I grew up on the west side in Price Hill, single mom, in poverty, made my way out of it. I consider myself a savvy investor. We sold a company back in 2015 to Zillow with some of my co-founders, own a co-working space over in Covington, rental properties, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things you look at when you're doing a deal isn't the most optimistic return. You look at what could happen. What the city's telling people right now is what I would consider the most optimistic return. You even have people out here thinking we're going to get an 11% return on this money. Any fiduciary worth their salt, anyone they hire to manage this money, this $1.6 billion, has a fiduciary responsibility, number one, for asset preservation. If your fiduciary responsibility is asset preservation of a municipal amount of money, over $1 billion, 70% of that money or more is probably going to go to treasuries and bonds. They're going to put out a number right now and tell everybody they're going to make 4.5% or whatever it is, just because the 10-year treasury right now is sitting at 4.5%. Well, the Fed just so happens to be raising interest rates right now. That's not going to happen forever. Interest rates are going to go back down to 2% where they historically are. And those treasuries are going to be reduced. The average rate of return on a treasury is around 1 to 3%. They're going to mix in the other 30% or 20% or whatever it is in REITs and equities. But on average, and I look through the history of the stock market, on average, that asset mix returns around 4%. So now say they get 4% and they're going to get $64 million, whatever they say they're going to get. What do you do about the principal, guys? Right? Everyone knows how inflation works. That principal, if they don't take from it, that principal is going to be reduced over time by inflation. Inflation never goes below 2%, never goes below 2%. So what's going to happen is they're going to make $64 million. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to put half of that back into the principal, which would be 2% of the overall value. And I hope you guys are following me here. But what I'm telling you is it's never going to beat inflation. That principal is going to get eaten away over time. And this is a long-term deal, guys. This isn't the next 10 years we're worried about. This is the next 100 years. That rail line has provided the city of Cincinnati a steady income all these years. And so what you're going to do is you're going to get rid of something that's producing a steady income that you can budget for, and you're replacing that with a maybe. A maybe. Maybe we earn 5.5%. So in a good year, you might get 5%. In a bad year, you're going to get 2.5%. And if you're putting money back into the principal and you're paying the fund manager at least 0.5%, 0.5% is $8 million a year. You end up with $0 in a bad year. $0. What are you going to do that year? It all comes down to this, guys. If the deal is so bad for the city right now, if you are a company whose sole purpose is to make profit, are you going to do the city a favor? What, are you going to buy the rail to take it off their hands? No, you're going to keep that bad deal going. But what the rail line knows is that the rail industry increases at over 6% value every year. That rail line is increasing more than the money they're going to make on that $1.6 billion in that fund, guys. The asset alone is going to increase in value. In the next 10 years, and you can go on the website, saveourrail.org, we're actually going to lose out on $1 billion over the next 10 years in asset increase. It's all on the website. I've got a comparison.
So, I mean, if we have to renegotiate the lease, it's going to go to a third-party independent arbitrator. Are you saying that they're going to value the railroad more than what the current lease terms are?
I could tell you right here, I would probably defer to Kevin, but I will tell you right now, the Bright Line, which is in Florida, they just finished the line just recently. $7.5 million a mile, and that's in Florida, where it's flat, labor is cheaper, and it's sunny all year round. Our rail line is 337 miles through mountains. There's bridges, there's tunnels. To recreate that line, you're looking at least $10 to $15 million a mile. In California, it's over $200 a mile to build rail. So if you went to arbitrator, go to an arbitrator. They can look at these numbers. You guys can look at these numbers. Look them up. I'm not lying to you. I mean, if it was better, I'm 100% about Cincinnati. Love Cincinnati. If this deal was better for Cincinnati, I'd be on that side of things. But all I had to do was dig into the numbers a little bit. It's bad.
Do you think we're going to get more from renegotiating the lease than why wouldn't they just do that instead of the sale?
I mean, let me put this over to Kevin. Kevin knows these numbers.
Thanks, Adam. Well, that's a good question to ask of the trustees. If you look back at the emails and the negotiations that have gone on, Norfolk Southern said, we won't pay more than $37 million a year. Well, of course that's what they're going to say. And when they first wanted to buy the property, they also said, we're not going to $787 million for the property. So it's a negotiation. But remember this arbitration that's set forth in the 1987 supplement to the lease that is what we're operating under right now. The city gets to choose one of the three arbitrators. Norfolk gets to choose one of the three arbitrators. And the two arbitrators get to choose the third arbitrator. So you have to look at how can an arbitrator make the decision. They have to base it on something. They can't pull these numbers out of the air. And so in appraising real estate, there's three methods. This is a true net lease. So once you figure out the value of the fee in the property, then it becomes the fair rental value is what's the expected return on investment for an asset that's worth that much. You take the $1.6 billion. Luckily, I'm under a tree. I'm sorry you guys are all getting wet. And that's where I took the 6% of that as a reasonable rate of return on an investment of that. But you could make it 4%. That's still $64 million a year. The other ways of appraising real estate are cost, as Adam was mentioning. Cost would be astronomically higher in value. You could also look at comparable sales. There really aren't a lot of comparable sales because railroads just don't sell railroad used miles. That's why they didn't want to sell the spur that became Wasson Way and charged us so much. they didn't want to sell it in the first place. They never want to sell real estate. So, you know, there's only a limited amount of real estate. God isn't making any more of it. So I think before we get the deluge, hopefully that answered your question. I'll be available other times to go into greater detail.
Thank you for coming. Once again, we feel that the railroad's undervalued and there is no lockbox, and we need to save this railroad and hold on to it for future generations.
Also, guys, I spoke to a rail attorney. He was in Cincinnati here for over 30 years as a rail attorney. He said, we have a seat at the table right now when it comes to rail. If we lose our seat at the table, you can almost say goodbye to being able to negotiate high-speed rail in Cincinnati. But we can pick up a phone right now. We can call almost any Class 1 rail line. If you sell that railroad, they won't take your call. So think about that, guys.
Thanks, everyone, for coming out. And go to saveourrail.org if you have any other questions, and we'll be available. Thanks for bearing up with us with the rain.